Welcome back to the Classic and Current Gaming Podcast, a weekly podcast where we look at the history and development of video games from all time. I'm your host, RxD22. This is episode 15 of the podcast, and it's episode 5 of season 2. For season 2, we're looking at video games that are being used in season 7 of the Retro Gaming League on Facebook. This week's game is an iconic Nintendo 64 title, one of the best first-person shooters of all time. We're going to look at GoldenEye 007 today. Let's dive right into it. GoldenEye 007 is a 1997 first-person shooter video game developed by Rare and published by Nintendo for the Nintendo 64. Based on the 1995 James Bond film GoldenEye, the player controls the secret agent James Bond to prevent a criminal syndicate from using a satellite weapon. They navigate a series of levels to complete objectives, such as recovering or destroying objects, while shooting enemies. In a multiplayer mode, up to 4 players compete in several deathmatch scenarios via split screen. Development began in January 1995. An inexperienced team led by Martin Hollis developed GoldenEye 007 over 2.5 years. The game was conceived initially as a rail shooter in the style of Sega's Virtua Cop from 1994, later developing into a first-person shooter. Rare visited the GoldenEye set for reference, and Eon Productions and Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer allowed them to expand the game with sequences and characters not featured in the film. GoldenEye 007 was released in August 1997, almost 2 years after the release of the film, but shortly before the release of its sequel, Tomorrow Never Dies. It faced low expectations from the gaming media during development. How it received critical acclaim and sold over 8 million copies, making it the third best-selling Nintendo 64 title. The game was praised for its visuals, gameplay depth and variety, and multiplayer mode. In 1998, it received the BFTA Interactive Entertainment Games Award and 4 awards from the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences. GoldenEye 007 demonstrated the viability of home consoles as platforms for first-person shooters, and signaled a transition from Doom-like shooters to a more realistic style. It pioneered features such as an atmospheric single-player missions, stealth elements, and multiplayer console deathmatch. The game is considered one of the greatest video games ever made, with many of its elements, such as the Klob gun, leaving an enduring impression in video game culture. A spiritual successor, Perfect Dark, was released in 2000, while a remake developed by Eurocom, also titled GoldenEye 007, was released in 2010. The original game was re-released in January 2023 on Xbox One and Xbox Series XS via Xbox Game Pass and Nintendo Switch via Nintendo Switch Online. Gameplay: GoldenEye 007 is a first-person shooter where the player takes the role of Secret Intelligence Service agent James Bond through a series of levels. In each level, the player must complete a series of objectives, while computer-controlled opponents try to hinder the player's progress. Objectives range from recovering items to destroying objects, defeating enemies, or rescuing hostages. Some objectives may also require the player to use high-tech gadgets. For example, in one level, the player must use Bond's electromagnetic watch to acquire a jail cell key. Although the player begins each level with a limited amount of supplies, additional weapons and ammunition can be acquired from defeated enemies. There are no health recovery items, but body armor can be acquired to provide a secondary health bar. The game features more than 20 weapons, including pistols, submachine guns, assault rifles, a sniper rifle, grenades, and throwing knives. Most weapons have a finite magazine and must be reloaded after a certain number of shots. Although each weapon has its own characteristics, ammunition is interchangeable between some weapon types. For example, pistols and submachine guns share the same ammunition. Weapons inflict different levels of damage depending on which body part they hit. Headshots cause the most damage, while arm and leg shots inflict the least damage. The Klob, a submachine gun with a folding stock, possesses a high rate of fire and a wide bullet spread compared to other weapons, but is severely underpowered with a heavy recoil. The Klob can be dual-wielded for additional firepower. Stealth is often encouraged, as frequent gunfire can alert distant guards and alarms can spawn enemies. Certain weapons incorporate a suppressor or a telescopic sight to aid the player in killing enemies discreetly. Each level can be played on 3 difficulty settings: Agent, Secret Agent, and 00 Agent. These affect aspects such as the damage enemies can withstand and inflict, the amount of ammunition available, and the number of objectives they must be completed. 2 bonus levels can be unlocked by completing the game on Special Agent and then on 00 Agent. The player may also replay previously completed levels within target times to unlock bonus cheat options such as finite ammunition or invincibility. Upon completing the game on the 3 difficulty settings, an additional mode is unlocked, allowing the player to customize the difficulty of a level by manually adjusting enemies' health, reaction times, aiming accuracy, and the damage they inflict. Multiplayer. GoldenEye 007 features a multiplayer mode where up to 4 players can compete in several deathmatch scenarios via split screen. These include Normal, You Only Live Twice, The Living Daylights, The Man with the Golden Gun, and License to Kill. Normal is a standard mode where players score points by killing opponents. Players can be grouped in teams or compete individually. You Only Live Twice gives players 2 lives before they are eliminated from the game, resulting in the last surviving player winning the match. In License to Kill, players die from a single hit with any weapon. Due to its high rate of fire and wide bullet spread, the club is highly advantageous in this scenario. In The Man with the Golden Gun, a single golden gun, which is capable of killing opponents with one shot, is placed in a fixed location in the level. Once the golden gun is picked up, the only way to reacquire it is by killing the player holding it. In The Living Daylights, a flag is placed in a fixed location in the level, and the player who holds it the longest wins. The flag carrier cannot use weapons, but can collect them to keep opponents from stocking ammunition. Options such as the chosen level, characters to play as, weapons available, and game length can be customized for each scenario. Additional levels and characters can be unlocked as the player progresses through the single-player game. Plot of the game. In 1986, Argenki's Soviet Union Mi-6 has uncovered a secret chemical weapons facility at the Bilamore Dam. James Bond and fellow 00 agent Alec Trevelyan are sent to infiltrate the facility and plant explosive charges. During the mission, Trevelyan is shot by General Arkady Umarov, while Bond escapes by commandeering an aeroplane. 5 years later, in 1991, Bond is sent to investigate a satellite control station in Severmaya, Russia, where programmer Boris Grishenko works. In 1993, Bond investigates an unscheduled test firing of a missile in Kazakhstan, believed to be a cover for the launch of a satellite known as GoldenEye. The space-based weapon works by firing a concentrated electromagnetic pulse, EMP, at any Earth target to disable any electrical circuit within range. As Bond leaves the silo, he is ambushed by Umarov and a squad of Russian troops. Umarov manages to escape during the encounter. In 1995, Bond visits Monte Carlo to investigate the frigate Lafayette, where he rescues several hostages and plants a tracker bug on the pirate helicopter before it is stolen by Janus crime syndicate. Bond is then sent a second time to Severmaya, but during the mission he is captured and locked up in the bunker cells along with Natalia Simonova, a captive computer programmer unwilling to work with Janus. They both escape the complex seconds before it is destroyed on the orders of Umarov by the GoldenEye's satellite EMP. Bond next travels to St. Petersburg, where he arranges with ex-KGB agent Valentin Zuvalsky to meet the chief of the Janus organization. This is revealed to be Alec Trevelyan. His execution by Umarov in the Arkhangelsk facility was faked. Bond and Natalia escape from Trevelyan but are arrested by the Russian police and taken to the military archives for interrogation. Eventually, Bond escapes the interrogation room, rescues Natalia, and communicates with Defense Minister Dmitry Mishkin, who has verified Bond's claim of Umarov's treachery. Natalia is recaptured by General Umarov, and Bond gives chase through the streets of St. Petersburg, eventually reaching an arms depot used by Janus. There, Bond destroys his weaponry stores and then hitches a ride on Trevelyan's ex-Soviet missile train, where he kills Umarov and rescues Natalia. However, Alec Trevelyan and his ally Xenia Onatop escape to their secret base in Cuba. Natalia accompanies Bond to the Caribbean. Surveying the Cuban jungle aerially, the light aircraft is shot down. Unscathed, Bond and Natalia perform a ground search of the area's heavy guarded jungle terrain, but are ambushed by Xenia, who is quickly killed by Bond. Bond sneaks Natalia into the control center to disrupt transmissions to the GoldenEye satellite and force it to burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. He then follows the fleeing Trevelyan through a series of flooded caverns, eventually arriving at the antenna of the control center's radio telescope. Trevelyan attempts to realign it in a final attempt to restore contact with the GoldenEye, but Bond destroys machinery vital to controlling the antenna and defeats Trevelyan in a gunfight on a platform above the dish. Development and design. GoldenEye 007 was developed by the British studio Rare and directed by Martin Hollis, who had previously worked as a second programmer on the coin-op version of Killer Instinct. In 1994, after Nintendo and Rare discussed the possibility of developing a game based on the upcoming James Bond film GoldenEye, Hollis told Tim Stamper, Rare's managing director, that he was interested in the project. Due to the success of Rare's 1994 game Donkey Kong Country, GoldenEye 007 was originally suggested as a 2D platformer for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. However, Hollis proposed a 3D shooting game for the upcoming Nintendo 64 console. He created a document with design ideas, including gadgets, weapons, characters, story digression from the film, and artificial intelligence that would react to the player. Rare named Sega's 1994 light gun shooter Virtua Cop, id Software's seminal 1993 first-person shooter Doom, and the Nintendo 64 launch Super Mario 64 as influences. Features such as gun reloading, position-dependent hit action animations, penalties for killing innocent characters, and the aiming system that is activated with the R button of the N64 controller were adopted from Virtua Cop. The developers considered having players reload weapons by unplugging and reinserting the Rebel pack on the controller, but Nintendo opposed the idea. The concept of several varied objects within each mission were inspired by the multiple tasks at each stage of Super Mario 64. The team visited the studios of the GoldenEye film several times to collect photographs and blueprints of the sets. EM Productions and MGM, the companies that control the James Bond films, granted the team a broad license, and many levels were extended or modified to allow the player to participate in sequences not seen in the film. Although the reference material was used for authenticity, the team was not afraid to add it up to the game design. John Woo films such as Hardboiled influenced the virtual effects and kinetic movements. Details such as bullet marks on walls, cartridge cases being ejected from guns, and objects exploding were part of the design. Hollis wanted players to receive a lot of feedback from the environment when they shot. The team considered implementing both on-rails and free-roaming modes because they did not know how the Nintendo 64 controller would work, and the game's gas plant location was modeled with a predetermined path in mind. A modified Sega Saturn controller was used for some early playtesting. The designer's initial priority was purely on the creation of interesting spaces. Level design and balance considerations such as the placement of start and exit points, characters, and objectives did not begin until this process was complete. According to Hollis, this unplanned approach gave many levels a realistic and non-linear feel, with several rooms having no direct relevance to a level. Production. Work on GoldenEye 007 began in January 1995 with a team hired by Hollis, programmer Mark Edmonds, background artist Carl Hilton, and characters artist B. Jones. Edmonds focused on creating a game engine that could render 3D graphics from art packages into Nintendo 64 data structures. Hilton modeled levels based on the film material, while Jones constructed characters based on photos and costumes they had. Since final Nintendo 64 specifications and development kits were not initially available to Rare, the team had to estimate the finalized console's capabilities using an SGI Onyx workstation and Nintendo's custom NINGEN development software. In the following months, designer Duncan Botwood joined the team to construct the levels. The first year was spent producing art assets and developing the engine, which originally only allowed the player and enemies to move around a virtual environment. After the first year of development, Rare added more staff to the project. The first addition was designer David Doak, who helped with the level designs and worked on the AI scripting. He explained how the stealth elements were implemented. Whenever you fired a gun, it had a radius test and alerted the non-player characters within that radius, If you fired the same gun again with a certain amount of time, it did a larger radius test, and I think there was a third, even larger radius test after that. It meant if you found one guy and shot him in the head and then didn't fire again, the timer would reset. Windows throughout the game were programmed so that the enemies cannot see through them. Though unrealistic, this encouraged the player to use windows to spy on enemies. Hollis hired a second programmer, Steve Ellis, 6 months later. Although Ellis assisted the development team in many areas and programmed the cheat options, he was mostly responsible for implementing the multiplayer mode, which was added roughly 6 months before release. According to Doak, Ellis sat in a room with all the code written for a single-player game and turned GoldenEye into a multiplayer game. The team spent numerous late evenings playtesting it. The multiplayer levels are based on single-player missions, and some of them do not support 4 players because they were initially not designed to handle multiplayer action. A firing range was modeled as an environment but was not added. Because the team assumed they could use anything from the James Bond universe, the multiplayer mode features characters that appear in previous Bond films. Actors who portrayed Bond in previous films were playable during development, but were removed because Rare was unable to get Sean Connery's permission to use his likeness. Despite the fictional names, most weapons were modeled after real-world firearms such as the Walther PPK, the AK-47, and the FN P90. The Club was inspired by the Scorpion, a Czechoslovakian submachine gun with a folding stock. Its name was chosen to honor Ken Lobb, who was Rare's Nintendo side producer and contact at the time. Another weapon, the DD-44 Dostoevsky, was named after Doak's initials. Adrian Smith, the game's third and last artist, who had already worked on some games at Rare, was in charge of producing visual effects such as muzzle flashes and explosions. He mentioned the 1995 film Heat as an influence. The final Nintendo 64 hardware could render polygons faster than the SGI Onyx workstation the development team had been using. This helped the developers significantly, as some backgrounds rendered at 2 frames per second on the Onyx without even drawing enemies, objects, or Bond's gun. However, the textures had to be cut down by half. Hilton explained one method of improving performance. A lot of GoldenEye is in black and white. RGB color textures cost a lot more in terms of processing power. You could double the resolution if you used grayscale, so a lot was done like that. If I need a bit of color, I'd add it in the vertex. When Super Mario 64 was released in 1996, the 3D collision detection system was influential for Hollis because GoldenEye 007 was originally using a 2D method. The music was primarily composed by Graham Norgate and Grant Kirkhope. Norgate previously penned the music for Blast Corps, while Kirkhope composed the music of Donkey Kong Land 2. Robin Beanland, the game's third composer, only wrote the elevator music that can be heard in certain levels. All the sound effects were created by Norgate, and a lot of effort was put into combining and permuting sounds in different ways to create a satisfying feel. According to Hollis, whenever the player shoots a gun, up to 9 different sound effects will randomly trigger. When the game was reviewed by Nintendo shortly before it was released, the company was slightly concerned about the amount of violence in gunplay. As a result, the team toned down the killing and added an end credit sequence that introduces all the non-player characters, giving the game a filmic sense. The game received a teen rating from the Entertainment Software Rating Board. GoldenEye 007 was released on a 96 megabit cartridge on August 25, 1997. Although this was over a year and a half after the release of the GoldenEye film, the game benefited from publicity for the upcoming James Bond film Tomorrow Never Dies. Every cartridge of the game contains a ZX Spectrum emulator with 10 Rare-developed games. This function was originally made as an experimental side project by Rare and was deactivated in the final version, but has since been unlocked through fan-made patches. The development of GoldenEye 007 took more than 2.5 years to complete and had a budget of $2 million. Reception. Despite low expectations among the gaming media and an unsuccessful showing at the Electronic Entertainment Expo in Atlanta in 1997, GoldenEye 007 received widespread acclaim from critics and was a commercial success. In 1998, it sold approximately 2.1 million copies. By 2001, it had sold over 7 million copies worldwide. Overall, GoldenEye 007 sold more than 8 million units worldwide, making it the third best-selling Nintendo 64 game behind Super Mario 64 and Mario Kart 64. According to a paper published on the website of the Entertainment Software Association, the game grossed $250 million worldwide. Graphically, GoldenEye 007 was praised for its varied and detailed environments, realistic animations, and special effects such as glass transparencies and lingering smoke. Nintendo Power said the frame rate in multiplayer games was high, while Electronic Gaming Monthly described it as somewhat choppy and sluggish. The zoomable sniper rifle was praised as one of the most impressive and entertaining features, with Edge describing it as a novel twist and Jeff Gerstmann of GameSpot noting its ability to alleviate the distance fog. The music was praised for its inclusion of the James Bond theme and for adding ambience. Some levels began in lifts and featured transitions from elevator music to full soundtracks, while Gerstmann cited as an illustration of the attention to detail. The gameplay was highlighted for its depth and requiring more stealth and intelligence than earlier first-person shooters. IGN's Doug Perry called GoldenEye 007 an immersive game which blends smart strategy gameplay with fast action gunmanship. Similarly, Greg Seward of Gaming Age remarked that players have a bit of freedom as to what they want to do in any given situation and what order the directives are completed in. Reviewers also enjoyed the wide variety of weapons and the multi-objective based missions, stating that they kept the game fresh. The controllers were praised for being more intuitive than Acclaim's earlier well-received Nintendo 64 first-person shooter Turok Dinosaur Hunter, though some found the cursor targeting difficult to master. Game Revolution credited the gameplay for being realistic and different from other shooters, but also criticized the campaign for being badly paced. The publication noted that GoldenEye 007 takes it for granted that you have already seen the movie, and that players may get stuck due to the game's lack of orientation. At the time, GoldenEye 007 was considered the best multiplayer game on the system, edging Mario Kart 64 by a hair, according to IGN. Edge called it addictive and praised the originality of some of the scenarios such as You Only Live Twice. GamePro said the multiplayer modes will have you shooting your friends for the rest of the year, while Next Generation highlighted the number of multiplayer options, calling GoldenEye 007 a surprisingly killer app, if only for the smashing multiplayer options. The excellent single-player gaming backing it up makes it well worth buying indeed. The game was also hailed for its accurate and detailed adaptation of the film, with GamePro going so far as to call it one of the best movie-to-game translations ever. The ability to use numerous signature Bond gadgets and weapons was considered a particularly strong element in this regard. Crispin Boyer of Electronic Gaming Monthly stated that Rare has packed everything that's cool about 007 into this game. GoldenEye 007 received multiple year-end awards, including the BAFTA Interactive Entertainment Games Award in 1998, and 4 awards from the inaugural AIAS Interactive Achievement Awards: Interactive Title of the Year, Console Game of the Year, Console Action Game of the Year, and Outstanding Achievement in Software Engineering. It also received nominations for Outstanding Achievement in Art and Graphics and Outstanding Achievement in Interactive Design. Electronic Gaming Monthly named it both Most Addictive Game and Best Movie to Game in their 1998 Video Game Buyer's Guide, and Game of the Year in their Editor's Choice Awards. Rare won the BFTA Award for Best UK Developer. Legacy. GoldenEye 007 has been credited for proving that it's possible to create a fun first-person shooter experience on a home console in both single-player and interactive modes. When the game was released, the first-person shooter genre was primarily for PC games. The game opened up the genre to console market and has been credited for paving the way for the popularity of Halo and Call of Duty. The game's introduction of a multiplayer deathmatch mode on a console is often credited for having revolutionized the genre, with Edge stating it set the standard for multiplayer console combat until it was surpassed by Halo Combat Evolved in 2001. GoldenEye 007 also introduced stealth elements that were unprecedented in first-person shooters. The game's use of realistic gameplay, which contrasted with the approaches taken by the Dune clones, and its context-sensitive hit locations on enemies added realism that was previously unseen in video games. Although the 1996 Team Fortress computer mod for Quake had previously introduced headshots. Alongside Shiny Entertainment's 1997 third-person shooter MDK, GoldenEye 007 has been credited with pioneering and popularizing the now standard inclusion of scoped sniper rifles in video games. GoldenEye 007 is frequently cited as one of the greatest video games of all time. Shortly after its release in 1997, Electronic Gaming Monthly ranked GoldenEye 007 the 25th best console video game of all time, calling it easily the best movie game, and more importantly, the best first-person game ever. In 1999, Next Generation editors placed GoldenEye 007 at number 10 on their list of top 50 games of all time, commenting, "Marion Doom-style shooting with trademark Bond missions, GoldenEye is the perfect thinking man shooter." In 2000, Computer and Video Games readers ranked GoldenEye 007 first place in the magazine's poll of 100 greatest games of all time, and fifth in a similar poll the following year. In 2001, Game Informer ranked the game 16th on its list of top 100 games of all time. In 2004, Retro Gamer readers voted GoldenEye 007 as the 33rd greatest retro game, with editors calling it easily the best Bond game to date. In 2005, IGN editors ranked the game 29th on their list of top 100 games of all time, while readers placed it at 7th on a separate list. In 2009, Official Nintendo Magazine ranked the game 55th on a list of greatest Nintendo games. All information in the podcast was provided by Wikipedia. And that'll bring this episode of the podcast to a close. We're a weekly podcast where we look at the history and development of various video games from all generations of time. You can catch the podcast on multiple platforms. You can watch it on YouTube with video content, or you can listen to it on Spotify or your other favorite listening podcast platform. We'll be back next week with another episode of the podcast. Next week's game, we're going to look at Kid Chameleon for the Sega Genesis. It's been RxDude22 from the Classic and Current Gaming Podcast signing out. Keep on gaming. See you on the next stream. Be good to each other. And you'll hear me on the next podcast next week. Everybody have a wonderful day, and thank you for listening or watching.